good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you guys joining us from Beijing, Moscow, and Washington, and in between. Okay, and this is truly a monumental moment. I'll be the moderator today, and for the next, let's say, 70 minutes, our job is not to rehash old grievances, I would say, but to hunt for areas where the three of us can actually do something good together. And global governance, economic stability, or nuclear risks, these are too big for any single power to handle individually. Okay. Each speaker will have about, let's say, 8 to 10 minutes, and I would kindly ask each guest speaker to capsule your speech within that time frame. And I will jump in with a quick reflection after each, trying to pull out some cooperative threads. So let's start with Professor Babaev.
I will probably say a few words on 4 particular points. First one is U.S.-Russian relations. Second, Russian-Chinese relations. Third, relationship between China and the United States. And finally, the overall analysis of what is happening between the three of them and what's the prospect. So first of all, the relationship between Russia and the United States. I should say that the new administration, the Trump administration of the United States, has failed to establish some kind of special relationship with Russia, even though it was quite a beneficial story from the very beginning. Many experts, many analysts said that probably the US and Russia can agree on the European matters in order to create a kind of an informal alliance, which would help Russia, which would help the United States to contain China more, and which would create a huge collective North, or the global North perspective. These speculations were underway from the beginning of 2024, but they didn't realize, and actually why they didn't come true, even though there was a summit in Anchorage in Alaska, even though the Russian authorities said a few times that they would be absolutely happy to establish some kind of friendly relationship with the United States. However, I think it was the historical prejudice about Russia in the American elite in Washington, in New York, a prejudice which is rooted in the Cold War period and which still prevents President Trump to go for some resolution of disputes with Russia, especially on the Ukrainian matter. The Ukrainian issue is still there, and it's, I think, the main factor that spoils the relationship between Russia and the USA. We see that the agreement cannot yet be achieved on even smaller matters, some kind of probably lifting the sanctions or return of property, which was seized by the American authorities from the Russian diplomatic authorities earlier in Obama times and Biden times. Even these small things cannot be resolved. I think this is the goodwill of Trump administration to do that. However, they cannot do it. So the only reason I can suggest here is that the Trump administration have finally given up the idea of creating Russia as a friendly power and chose the way to continue the counter-opposition to Russian interests in Europe. So we'll see how it will go next. However, what we see now is that Russia would be definitely happy to improve the relationship with the United States, both in economic regard and in political sphere. There are definitely European allies which are doing quite a lot to prevent this to happen. And they would discourage President Trump as much as possible against these steps. I think probably in the near future there might be some other discussions, even the summit meetings between our two leaders, President Putin and President Trump. However, I'm absolutely skeptical about the outcomes, and I think that the relationship will remain like what we have here now, while the Ukrainian conflict is still underway. If they manage to resolve, however, the Ukrainian situation, that might be much better because Russia and the US will have no other disputes either in Europe or elsewhere, and might agree on some major economic deal in Arctic or in the energy sector or elsewhere, and that might mean the improvement of the relationship. So let's see. The relations between Russia and China are boosted by the recent visit, and they are going fine. Russia and China need each other both in energy, in agriculture, in manufacturing products. Their economies are interdependent. However, Russia is doing a lot to decrease the potential critical dependence on the Chinese economy by both diversifying its imports of manufacturing goods and by trying to replace imports with local production. The Russian government is doing quite a lot to invite Chinese companies to invest into the Russian economy instead of just selling the goods to the Russian market. And I think that strategy might be a success. In economic field, however, we still have quite a lot of contradictions with China. I don't think they threaten the political relationship, because the political relationship is just sunny and without any substantial problems. Russia and China have the common vision for the future of the humanity. They have a common vision to most international and regional problems and issues. They coordinate their foreign policy, and our leaders are very good friends, fond of each other. So I don't think we will have any disputes, any issues in this relationship in the years to come. Even in the long-term perspective, Russia and China will need each other badly to at least structure the BRICS, to structure the common Great Eurasia project, and so on. The relationship between China and the United States are much more complicated. The two countries do need each other. However, both of them have already, I think, refused the creation of Chimerica, the bilateral world, bipolar world, which would be ruled by China and America together. I think the only reason is that America doesn't actually want someone to share the responsibility for global affairs and share the domination on the world system of global governance. So I think that still China and the US will compete more than cooperate. They might resume and even improve their trade relations, their economic cooperation. They might agree on some particular political matters, but I don't think the strategic deal, the big deal between the two is possible, even though in China quite a lot of people still are dreaming about that. It cannot be true, and I think the American elite and even President Trump himself do understand that China is definitely the main challenge for American global domination for the years to come. So probably the main factor in the relationship between the two is the Taiwan issue. In case the United States make concessions in this issue and give up support for Taiwan, I think China will definitely reunite the country, and that will ruin the whole system of the whole chain of American political and military alliances in Asia Pacific, and will allow China to become a dominating player in Asia Pacific in general. So Americans do understand that, but they have not many instruments to influence that, because for some very strange, very weird reasons, America found itself involved in 3 very big conflicts, regional conflicts outside Asia Pacific, even though the national security strategy presumes that America should be focused on Asia Pacific. However, it's in the Ukrainian war in Europe, it's in the Iranian war in the Middle East, it's in the Gaza problem also. And all of these 3 conflicts are very far from China and very far from the American interests in Asia Pacific. America spends quite a lot of funds and resources and military power to deal with these problems. So that will probably stay. As for the relationship between the 3, finally, the common picture is that there is no 4th player in the world who might be the initiator of a new system of global governance. Only the 3 countries, Russia, China, and the United States, if they sit down at the same table of negotiations, might create a new system of international relations, might create the new Yalta and the new United Nations, probably to modify the existing structure or to create something new. But I mean, there is no 4th great power which is so influential in the world right away. And I think the construction which might appear from the negotiations between the 3 might really serve the global stability and establish a new system which would last for probably several decades from now. They do not do that for many reasons. One of them, I think the main reason is that America doesn't want, once again, to share its global domination status. And this is why it doesn't want to make a compromise between the 3. Probably President Trump will find himself capable of doing that, but I doubt that. I think we will still have several years ahead, which we will see the increasing competition between Russia and China from one side and the United States from the other side, until finally the 3 countries sit down and try to establish a balanced system of global governance based on the so-called multipolar world, which will not definitely be limited to the 3, but will also include many regional players who will definitely join this structure if it is proposed by the 3 global players. So I think that there is not much to discuss right away, just because America will probably not ready to discuss the concessions to either Russia or China in terms of global governance. But with the growth of the Chinese economy, with the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict, with probably the growing power of the global South in general, America will be more eager to go for some compromise with China, Russia, and the global majority, as we call it. And so we will see the birth of the new system of international relations. Let's see how soon it might happen.
I'm really impressed by a couple of points here. I see a lot of alliances that have been formed or is forming around the world. I want to stress the point that this is just my personal opinion, that none of these alliances should be exclusive. I would prefer to see a world where alliances are all inclusive to all parties. And the way to achieving harmony in international community is never a smooth road. It's always bumpy. Okay? And that's why I think it's absolutely necessary for us tankers to come together to take the first step and sit down and have a candid and constructive talk so that our political leaders in the respective countries can follow our advice, and then we'll come to a more harmonized future. Okay. And Professor Morris, please.
My comments today will focus on 2 areas. One, I'm going to talk about the outcomes of the recent summit between President Putin and President Xi Jinping. And second, I would like to offer a U.S. perspective on the overall trajectory of China-Russia relations and what I think it means sitting where I sit in Washington, D.C. My first big takeaway from the Putin-Xi summit was, to be perfectly frank, I think it failed to meet some expectations, especially on the Russian side. The biggest surprise to me was the failure apparently of China to sign formally the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline, which, as many of you know, has been in negotiations for over a decade now. While the Kremlin said both sides had reached a, quote, general understanding of the parameters, unquote, of the project, it appears that no formal agreement was signed during the summit. This, to me, is a pretty large setback for Russia and Putin. Putin himself hinted before the visit that a breakthrough was in the works. So it's speculative, but it appears that China may not have agreed to Russia's proposal on, for example, pricing for the pipeline and financing. This, of course, comes at a critical time for Russia, who has lost some leverage with the European Union, who has shut off some gas flows between Europe and Moscow. But to me, there really is no way to sugarcoat it. I think the failure to agree to the pipeline is a setback for Putin if I'm sitting in Moscow and analyzing the outcome of the summit. Now, we'll speak to the positive side of the summit. There was a lot of, I would say, flowery language and friendship between Putin and Xi. The two countries signed a reportedly 10,000-word joint statement, including agreements on nuclear security, Taiwan, nuclear energy, and even wildlife preservation. Putin himself said the two sides signed 40 intergovernmental agreements. And Xi really rolled out the red carpet for Putin. He hosted Putin at the Great Wall of the People, for example, with great pomp and circumstance. They showed, great friendship, which is something that we've come to understand between the two leaders. And just to take a step back, China-Russia relations this year is very important for the two. It marks first the 30th anniversary of the China-Russia strategic partnership, as well as the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Russia-China Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation. This was, of course, the treaty that laid the foundation for their new close partnership. President Xi called this new era of Russia-China relations, quote, the highest level in history as a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for the new era. Both leaders highlighted a lot of principles, for example, no alliances, non-confrontation, and not targeting any third parties. Both pledged a commitment to equality, mutual respect, good faith, and win-win cooperation, something we've heard a lot before when the two meet. Both also highlighted political mutual trust and alignment on global governance. And here again, it was interesting to see some of the critiques, oblique, I would say, critiques, not direct, of the United States. They said, quote, unilateralism and hegemonism have brought severe harm to the world and risk regressing into the, quote, law of the jungle, which I thought was a new quote. I had not heard that before. Finally, their joint declaration called for a new multipolar world and a new type of international relations, and highlighted the role of the United Nations as the most important body in international relations. Finally, for China, I think this moment is pretty big for China, as Chris and others have mentioned, with Trump's recent trip to Beijing and now with Putin's visit to Beijing. I think it's clear that Beijing has become a hub of global diplomacy. Global leaders increasingly appear to court Xi, want to meet Xi on major geopolitical issues. In other words, Beijing has become I think, arrival to Washington, D.C. as the new center of gravity for geopolitical influence. So those are my comments on the Putin-Xi summit. Next, let me move to conveying what I see and hear about U.S. concerns about the trajectory of China-Russia relations. These concerns center on the emergence of an increasingly aligned strategic partnership between Russia and China that together challenge key elements of the U.S.-led international order. From my perspective, American policymakers worry that deepening coordination between China and Russia could or may erode U.S. military advantages, weaken the effectiveness of U.S. sanctions and export controls, and complicate Washington's ability to manage simultaneous crises in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. From a security perspective, U.S. officials are concerned about Russia-China military cooperation between the PLA and Russian armed forces, including joint exercises, things like bomber patrols and naval operations. This has direct influence over conflicts in Ukraine. I would point out a recent Reuters report that claimed that China trained 200 Russian soldiers who later deployed to Ukraine, for example. So U.S. analysts and the U.S. government, from my perspective, I think worry that Russia's experience in the war in Ukraine could provide operational lessons relevant to China's military and potential contingencies between China and Taiwan. So my perspective is I think Washington assesses that such cooperation between China and Russia improves, no doubt, their interoperability, possibly signals greater political alignment against the United States and its allies. And then finally, economically and technologically, the U.S. has expressed concerns that China has helped kind of mitigate or blunt the impact of Western sanctions imposed on Russia after the conflict in Ukraine. U.S. officials have scrutinized Chinese exports of dual-use technologies, things like machine tools, microelectronics, drones, etc., inputs that support Russia's defense industrial base. At the same time, growing energy cooperation, including long-term oil and gas agreements, and discussions surrounding projects such as the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, as I just mentioned, is viewed in Washington as reinforcing Russia's economic resilience and reducing Western leverage. Finally, at the geopolitical level, I think U.S. policymakers are concerned that Beijing and Moscow are increasingly coordinating diplomatically to possibly contest U.S. influence in multilateral institutions and are promoting, one would say, alternative norms of sovereignty, things like cybersecurity, human rights, and global governance. Joint statements by Xi Jinping and President Putin frequently criticize U.S. hegemony and NATO expansion while emphasizing a new multipolar world order. So from my perspective, American officials, I think, maybe not fear, but are concerned that this alignment could encourage other countries to coordinate globally and possibly undermine deterrence by creating the possibility of overlapping or simultaneous crises across multiple theaters. All that said, I'm a big proponent of the U.S. and Russia and China working together and having dialogue. There's a lot of areas for cooperation, in particular in the nuclear and arms control domain. Now that New START has expired, I think the world is looking for the U.S. and Russia to agree to a New START agreement in some form. So I think there's a lot of areas where the three in particular, the U.S. and Russia, not only could, but need to coordinate and cooperate, especially when it comes to areas when military issues, security issues, and foreign policy. There's a lot to discuss. So I highlight some of these concerns from Washington, not necessarily because I agree with all of them, but just to offer context to this discussion on kind of overall trends in U.S. China-Russia relations. So I will stop there. Chris, back to you, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
That's a very candid assessment and sharing of information. I think we all need to know how Washington is seeing this relationship between China and Russia. And there are a couple of points that I think are particularly interesting. That is, I agree that now is a kind of sensitive and delicate moment with two wars going on around the world. And I want to remind everybody that China has a long time partnership or friendship with both United States and Russia, dating back to the Second World War II, the Second World War. Okay? That's a long time ago, but still remember vividly how that war ended. And the reason that the friendship lasts such a long time is because it's it's made out of mutual interest and respect. And I hope that Beijing will become an international platform for, it's not a shift of political center of gravity, it's just a platform so everybody can work together, and we can construct something that works for the future, right? And our next guest is Professor Liu.
Thank you very much for all colleagues. So happy to meet you here today, because I am much concerned and interested to talk this topic, because the whole society, after the 3 meetings with Xi Jinping, Trump and Putin in Beijing, the whole society in Beijing and China are very warm to discussing the triangle relations between the big 3 powers. The mainstream of the opinion are very positive and optimistic for the future, because this is the first time that in the short time, these 3 leaders joined in separate cases in China, in Beijing, discussing the international issues. So very important for the 3 countries, but also for the whole world. Several days ago in the lunchtime, we had a small lunch together with some international guests and the Chinese scholars in Beijing. The dining room has a special name. It's a very very opportunity that we get the name of the room. That's a Heheting. Heheting meaning in English is compromising and cooperation or harmony. I said this name of this dining room that shows our tendency of the international order, because China and the U.S. need compromising, and China with Russia will need harmony and cooperation. 3 countries together will need also the compromising and the cooperation. This is a very important precondition. And I think the leaders' meeting has already achieved such a goal. We got the compromising, we got the promising for cooperation on the future cooperations in different areas. So I still remember that 14 years ago, supported by Professor Wang Wen, we have proposed a very important proposal to the world through the through the Global Times newspaper in China. That is, we have suggested the United States should take a reform and open up policy. You'll remember this is 14 years before. At the moment, I think that this 40 years already passed. This actually does tested this necessity for the United States, including Russia, to take similar reform as China and open up policy for the rest of the world. Because many questions can remain in this issue. China has also met many difficulties and problems in developing the economy and the relations internationally. But after we take a reform and open up, I think that all these major problems we find a good answer, we find a good solution. Nowadays, 250 years later, the United States come to the crossroad. They should consider what the way to go. Still as a hegemony, as a global police or any other role or functions, or whether the United States should take a serious consideration to take a reform as China has done. If China has already taken a successful reform, I think no reason for other countries not to take the reform and open it up. Because many countries before, they always thinking that China was a country under iron curtain, that always under some very tough control or systematic pressure. So if China can be successful by taking reform and open up, why not the United States should follow up? And Russia also have the same. Of course, Russia has already taken a reform, but the reform not so successful. That is the shock therapy, make the economic collapse. So China make the reform to avoid this problem that Russia has already got, and also we avoid the way that the United States followed. We find the way that is suitable for China. This is the reason that China has successfully taken reform in the past 45 years. So I should remain that our proposal that the United States and Russia and the whole world should take a reform that as we have in this way we can have more cooperation and find a compromise together to find a good solution for a shared future. And of course, in my opinion, at the moment, that the professor I had already discussing the international order at the moment. In my opinion, that at the moment there is a big mistake, or very serious mistake by the United States and the rest of the world, is that they take China as the enemy, as a major competitor. This is totally wrong. If the United States could not give up such bias or such a political concept, but taking China as an enemy or as a somewhat that the major competitor, this is a very unnecessary, very not so useful for their own development, because the history, 1,000 years already, 2,000 years already tested, China is always a very constructive force in the world affairs, not only economically but also in politically, in the diplomatically. China has a very special function that the other countries cannot replace it. So this is the way that we should try to see that such a big mistake should be corrected, should avoid it. In this way, we can find a good way to have a close cooperation. And the second very important thing that this international order after the Second World War is now facing disruption, very dangerous disruption. In some countries, I have to say, we are still under the shadow of Second World War. The Second World War is not fully completed. It's not fully really ended. Why? Because in Korea Peninsula, we have agreement only for ceasefire, not for long-lasting peaceful agreement. This is point one. Second, those invaders, for instance, the aggressors, and also the military who made the crimes, defeated countries today still not declared guilty for their crimes in the Second World War. They also wish to restore their military forces, even to have restoration of their dream before the Second World War. So that means This is the real situation, no matter whether you recognize or you acknowledge or not. This is true. This is the main threat to the Asian development, also to the world peace. So I mean that the United States has real responsibility to take all efforts that to make the international order according to the conclusion of the Second World War, because still ongoing in different forms, in different ways. Now we see some countries defeated in this in the war that still try to rise up militarily to show the hegemony in the military forces to threaten their peace in Asia, in other areas. So these two things, I mean, that at the moment is a very serious challenge for China, for the United States, and for Russia. Because I fully agree that China, Russia, and the USA should remain at the constructive strategic stability. But how to do it? Mutual respect is the precondition. Mutual respect is the basis for future dialogue, for future connections. So I'm optimistic, of course, to talk all these things, but actually many people in China are very concerned, much concerned, or some people still have pessimistic. Why? Because they say they are afraid that the U.S. government, the U.S. politicians have always tried some uncertainties, but because the continuity of the policy, whether they promise today and they will change tomorrow, because their political system and the two-party system can make many challenges for domestic policy, for diplomatic policy. This is what we need: more negotiation, more dialogue, more cooperation. But mutual respect is always the precondition for our triangle relations. This is what I want to talk today at the moment.
About that, the name of the dining hall, I would say that's a very interesting metaphor. Actually, it means harmony, peace, and compromising as well, as you rightly put there. Okay, and the second thing I want to say is that just a couple of days ago, former U.S. ambassador to Moscow, Michael, visited the Chongyang Institute, and I think one of his points might be interesting and relevant for today's discussion is that he mentioned some American politicians within that Washington circle is not seeking hegemony anymore. It thinks that is too much a burden for the United States to take alone. And U.S. genuinely want to share that responsibility with other countries who are willing to cooperate and work together. I think that at least part of the political direction is shifting, okay? And that definitely opens the door for future discussion and for dialogues. Okay, so next let's welcome Professor Wang Yiwei.
Thank you. China, U.S., Russia, with a new paradigm, new type of great power relationship. What does it mean? Number one is not repeat the history that China, Soviet Union, the United States in the 1970s. Why is not? Because China is not yesterday China. We are globalized. It's not a revolution period. And Russia definitely is also not Soviet Union. And even United States is not 1970s United States. There's a Britain wood system collapse. The U.S. dollar not pick with the gold. So that's kind of, I think, the new three powers. Most importantly, the world is different. It's not the so-called T3 or great powers rivalry to define the international order. Today, I think maybe AI and new technologies more be focused. It's not a nuclear weapons to make the decisive role to stabilize. So the second meaning of the new paradigm that before is so-called MAT, but today is the MATS, so-called MAT, mutual mass assurance of destruction as the nuclear rules, among big three. Today we say it's mutual assurance of survivability, or some people say survival, or some people even say the AI safety or AI security. But definitely survivability, I think that's the most important consensus in the big three. And it's also the world expectation. So it's not a mutual assurance of the destruction, it's a mutual assurance of stability. So that's basically China-US constructive strategic stability. So this time, President Trump's visit, the most important achievement is a new paradigm of the China-US relationship. The precondition is to handle the Taiwan issue perfectly. I think in the news, I think the most important sentence that said that both China and the United States reached the consensus that the Taiwan Strait peace. I think that's most important for each side. Taiwan Strait peace. Otherwise, China-US will be involved in any direct conflict, even war, because of the Taiwan. So President Xi reiterated the red line of the Taiwan. And we understand that the U.S., they also have the so-called Taiwan Relation Act, besides of the 3 communicas and the 6th assurance. However, the Taiwan Relation Act says if any side to change the status quo, that's it's a top concerns for the American national security and interests. It's not necessary that the U.S. will send troops to protect Taiwan. It didn't say that. It's just about the status quo. So Taiwan independence is to change the status quo, actually. There are 3 signals that the meaning of the Taiwan independence. Number 1, if Taiwan authority amend the constitution. So far, the constitution is still in the name of the people, the name of the Republic of China, ROC constitution. If they change to the Taiwan Republic constitution, definitely that's the Taiwan independence. Number 2, there is a cross-strait act. In Chinese, we say 两岸条例. If the Taiwan authorities change this relationship or act to call the peoples in Taiwan area and the peoples in the mainland area, it's about regulation of that. That's still considered about this is Taiwan and the mainland. If they change the narrative, for instance, Taiwan and China, like many Americans say that, that's also Taiwan independence. So far, any Taiwan leaders didn't change that kind of regulation. This is very important. We say rule of law. Thirdly, if Taiwan participant like United Nations or any international organizations that only sovereign states can join, thus Taiwan get the full so-called sovereignty. Even today, they have the people, they have the so-called territory or government, but because they don't have the sovereignty fully recognized by the international community, so Taiwan is not independent state. Okay, so that's very, very important. I think the President Xi and the President Trump make the consensus that don't touch Taiwan and let it be. And we are busy. And U.S., American first. China, we have a 5-year plan. Okay, we are busy for domestic issues. So Taiwan is not a bird, cannot fly away from Taiwan Strait. So that's the most important the consensus, I think. And then don't sell arms to Taiwan to make encourage Taiwan independence. I think that's very important. President Trump said it very clearly, and Taiwan is 9,050 miles away from the United States, only 50 miles away from the mainland. So why is the vital interest of the United States? That's perfect. I think it's very clearly. Okay, so this consensus is make sure that China-US can be strategic stability relationship in the coming years under the President Trump's and President Xi's leadership. Okay, from both sides. And most importantly, also the China-Russia and the U.S. relationship is not about previously about against each other. They are about the world now. So China and Russia, I think, is a new model of the great power relationships. We learn a lot of mistakes and from the China-Soviet Union relationship. We used to be the ally and then confronted and compete about who is the authority of orthodox of the socialism. And then even we have conflict and border conflict and even war, even nuclear. So the Union want to use nuclear weapons to destroy China. So many terrible memory about that. So why today be the new model, or the model of the great power relationships with the three no? Not ally, too big to be another country's ally. Okay, China and Russia, they are too big. Secondly, not seek to confront it with any others or confront each other. And thirdly, not target any third party. So these three no, I think, is the guide to the China-Russian relationship, the new type. And the most important I would need to emphasize is the 3M. I think the mutual understanding. Now Russians understand finally China is not seeking hegemony. But U.S. maybe not understand so much, but because of President Putin repeatedly said that, and even Russian people. For instance, I visited Russia. They told me frankly, when the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia was so weak. China didn't take the opportunity to take back over 1.5 million the kilometers of territory, right, from the Caesar period to the Qing dynasty. So China is not that country take use of your weakness, danger to do other things. So they trust China in this regard. Later, actually, when Russia involved conflict in either in Crimea or in Ukraine, and China didn't take use of that difficulties of Russia to do something to harm to Russia or put Russia involve any other conflicts, for instance. And also, I think that's mutual trust. So very important. And then mutual respect, secondly. So China and Russia respect each other. For instance, even some Chinese people maybe think about Russia is only 1/10 of the Chinese GDP. However, the Chinese government position is very clear. Russia always be the great power, permanent member of United Nations Security Council. And the mutual respect is most importantly, we most sacrifice for the victory of the World War II. China, we lost 35 million casualties, and the Soviet Union's 27 million. So think about the population, and so those that sacrifice most and actually contribute the most for the World War II victory. So that reason, China and Russia always think about we are defender of the World War II system and the United Nations, and so that reason we have a common concern that the new militarism rising in Japan, and also new imperialism, new hegemonism. I think that's the United Nations found the reason for that. And then also mutual understanding, mutual respect, and then finally mutual trust. Particularly on the top leadership's intensive discussions, and like President Putin, President Xi met 25 times, and very intensive discussions every time. So that's on the 3M, mutual understanding, mutual respect, and mutual trust. So that's reason I think China-Russian relationship. We can also, what is the implications for the China-US relationship? If after President Trump, I think we need have more intensive discussions, frank discussions among top leaders to understand each other and mutual trust each other, and then mutual respect each other. Then I think so-called make American great again, and the Chinese great regeneration of the Chinese nation can have the synergy. It's not either way, or it's not a zero-sum game. And President Trump, I think, mentioned twice about the Confucians in the steak banquet toast. I think Franklin met and also founding father of the U.S. and also the Supreme Court of the United States. So that's very important in AI. The U.S. actually is like a more mercy to make the law, judicial, under the religious law. But we need solid, maybe the European Union or Russia. But also we need China, Confucians, like cynic contribution and also morality. So AI actually is our top concern. And then we need each other. We can not just talk about each other, against each other. We are make the AI to define the humanity, or humanity define AI. So yesterday, the Pope make also announcement about, I think I understand it's the new human renaissance. So that in this regard, so AI replace the nuclear weapons to make sure China, Russia, and the United States can have the mutual assurance of the stability. So this is the hope. for our trilateral relations and hope for the world order. Thank you.
Professor Wang makes an excellent point in saying that it's not we Chinese generally don't take advantage of friends when they need us the most. And I think as for the cooperation, the area for cooperations, we need to decouple or delink two things. One is the area, the segments that we disagree with each other. And the other is that we agree with each other. And we should put circuit breakers on areas that we don't agree with each other and try not to make it contagious to other areas of cooperation. I actually pulled Professor Wang first because I wanted to hear something more optimistic. Okay, so now let's go back to Professor Pierre Andrieu. Please, Professor Andrieu.
So I will speak a little bit, yes, about the visit of President Putin in Beijing and try to make some lessons. So we know about the importance of the relations between Russia and China, and also especially in the economic field and energetic field. These relations are very important, but also very asymmetric. During this meeting, this visit of President Putin, the two presidents signed 42 bilateral agreements, as Lyle recorded, including an agreement on further strengthening partnership and deepening friendship. Actually, among these documents, the only significant one was the extension of visa-free travel between the countries until the end of 2027. The agreement on the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which should have been the major event of the visit and could have been the only breakthrough, was missing from the list. Putin fails once again to convince Xi Jinping to back this very important project for his country. I can recall that the memorandum of Power of Siberia 2 was signed 20 years ago. It was hoped that both presidents would sign the construction contract this time, but that didn't happen. However, the blockade of Strait of Hormuz highlighted the superiority of transporting hydrocarbons by land over by the sea. Trying to make the best of a bad situation, the Kremlin recalled that a general agreement existed, but the key details remain to be finalized. Moscow has been making similar statements for years now. And of course, as we know, China constitutes a crucial lifeline for the Russian economy, which is beginning to feel the serious effects of Western sanctions and the devastating impact of the Ukrainian military actions aimed at diminishing its oil refinery capacity. Some do not hesitate to say that Russia does not win in Ukraine. Of course, these worrying developments, as well as discussions in Moscow regarding the possibility of negotiations with Ukraine or the West, are being closely monitored in Beijing. What China seems to fear more than anything is the fall of Putin's regime and the possible disintegration of Russia, as with the USSR in 1991, which could create a situation of anarchy along its very long common border. These fears, coupled with all economic and energy factors, undoubtedly constitute the strongest foundation of the Russia-Chinese strategic alliance, in brackets strategic alliance, which he has stately strengthened since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. It encompasses political and ideological relations in the face of the West, perceived as increasingly aggressive. Relations between the two countries are no longer limitless. They are rather shoulder to shoulder, which is more martial in nature. Nevertheless, the Sino-Russian partnership is based on a cold-blooded strategic calculus, shaped by convergent interests in economic cooperation, security, and geopolitics. In terms of form, it is not an alliance, but a flexible strategic partnership. In the absence of the duly signed agreement, each of the two protagonists enjoys a certain degree of flexibility in conducting its foreign policy, in principle independently. Despite Russia's subservience to China, Beijing would have some difficulty convincing Moscow to end the war in Ukraine, as the European desire. Just it has been unable to halt North Korean nuclear program, the country is even more subservient to China. And Beijing has a vested interest in the continuation of this war. Now, the question that is put in Europe and everywhere, has Russia become a vassal of China? That's why, although the partnership is increasingly unequal, fears of Russian total vassalage seem overblown. As written Alexander Gabuev, who is the director of the Carnegie Russian Center, he wrote, Russia's growing vassalage to China appears entrenched, driven by Putin's focus on Ukraine and animosity towards the West, rather than a coherent strategy. In any case, I think that Russia cannot be unequal within the U.S.-China duopoly, and within a strategic triangle of Washington, Beijing, Moscow, this triangle does not exist. There is no big three, contrary to what the Russian press sometimes claims. In the cooperation and in the competition and confrontation between the United States and China, Russia will be an auxiliary of the latter. Thank you very much for your attention.
I heard the two pipeline thing like twice during this discussion. Just a quick opinion is that I think these things compared to the broader span of other opportunities between China and Russia, like could be considered as a needle in a haystack, okay, in magnitude. And there might be other things that we can pursue at the same time. But of course, for this meeting, perhaps a lot of people watching these the progress on the two pipelines. Last but not least, Professor Vladimir Vasiliev.
We are living in extremely unstable and unpredictable times, when the global situation is changing almost daily. Several tension areas have emerged in different parts of the world, and therefore it's impossible to discuss relations between Russia, the United States, and China without taking into account the dynamics of the international situation. It's impossible to discount Europe and the Middle East that significantly influences any processes. At the same time, we can already state the fact that a global triad has emerged, the relation within which will determine the path the world as a whole will take. But the world is interconnected, and even small countries can spark major changes. Why does everything in the world seem so chaotic right now? And it seems that this chaos is created by the policies of President Trump, who has confused almost everyone with contradictory statements of many issues, and no one can say for sure what he has meant. Take the war with Iran. The declared quick victory didn't materialize, and many analysts rushed to gloat that the U.S. have weakened, that their weapons are running low, etc. In my opinion, Trump's chaotic and erratic statements are simply a smokescreen, concealing his true intentions. I don't think the president of the superpower can be completely open about the goals and objectives of the country striving to maintain global dominance. The simultaneous blockade of Cuba, creation of tension in the Arctic over Greenland, capture of the Venezuelan president, tariff war, refusal to support Ukraine, threat of leaving NATO, withdrawal from numerous international treaties, etc., do not allow for concentration and understanding to a clear line of conduct and plans for achieving the main goals of the United States. But here is how Peter Clark, my good friend and American businessman who has lived in Russia, namely in Irkutsk, for over 20 years, explains the behavior of the American elite. Here's a quote. American businessmen don't care about the long-term growth of their companies. They focus only on short-term bonuses, which can often be manipulated to the detriment of the company's long-term growth. They certainly don't have the ability to develop a plan or strategy to achieve their goals. End of quote. If Peter is right and the U.S. lack of a long-term strategy, then the world has been left with an unpredictable and dangerous situation, where the power's sudden movements in different directions could trigger an irreversible process of destruction. In these circumstances, each country is trying to define its role and place, deciding whether to join or form alliances with various countries. Russia and China have historically been closely linked, and are committed to building good neighborly relations, which are now perhaps at their highest point ever and are based on the following principles. During Vladimir Putin's scheduled visit to Beijing in May, the two sides extended the Treaty of Good Neighbor Alliance, friendship and cooperation, underscoring the long-term nature of the alliance. Both countries advocate the formation of multipolar world and a new type of international relations. As for relations between the world's two largest economies, the United States and China, they remain complicated. While competing for global leadership, they remain deeply linked economically. The United States view China as its main strategic competitor. Former Secretary of State Antony Blinken explicitly stated that it may be difficult for the United States to confront China alone due to its strengths in trade, science, and military affairs. Despite the current reciprocal tariffs, U.S. businesses remain optimistic and continue to invest in the Chinese market. During the negotiations in May, the parties reached preliminary agreements on tariff reductions by $30 billion in the trade turnover and purchase of 200 Boeing aircraft by China. So the original plan was to sell 500 aircraft, but 200 were agreed upon. After a long period of cooling, following meetings between President Putin and Trump, a trend toward cautious rapprochement has emerged between the U.S. and Russia. Moscow is proposing to Washington to build relations based on mutual respect and de-ideologization. Experts believe the U.S. is demonstrating goodwill to Moscow. This could include discussing sanctions relief, including on Russian oil exports. However, this easing is currently more closely linked to the situation in the Middle East. To make it clear, we can imagine the goals of each country in this triangle. Russia's goals to consolidate its status as one of the centers of multipolar world, using the term to the east as a basis and simultaneously seeking detent with the United States to remove sanctions pressure. China's goal to secure a space for economic growth by offsetting U.S. pressure through an alliance with Russia, while maintaining important trade ties with America to avoid a complete rupture. U.S. goal to contain the growing influence of China while trying to prevent Russia and China from completely merging into a single anti-American bloc. When discussing relations between the three powers, one cannot ignore the European factor, whose role is paradoxical. Europe simultaneously acts as both an obstacle and a potential binding factor, but more for the United States and Russia than for all three. The European project has always moved from crisis to crisis, but today's situation is unique in that the threat emanates not from a single opponent, but from the very architecture of the new world, which three powers can build without Europe's participation. This circumstance could accelerate the process of European unification, despite its current appearance of being more fragmented. But unification takes years, while the threat could materialize in months. Europe may simply not have time to wake up as a united force. Russia, China, and even the US are actively working with individual European countries to block a common foreign policy. The stronger the external pressure, the more intense the internal struggle will be. The United States could support Europe to strengthen its leadership in the triad, while weakening Russia and China. But all three have a common interest, a stable but manageable Europe. So, what conclusion can be drawn? I believe the three powers need to find common ground and begin building a new global governance architecture, without excluding the role of Europe and the major Asian economies. I believe constructive dialogue could begin in the Pacific region, where our countries have many overlapping interests, despite the U.S. withdrawal from the Pacific Cooperation Agreements. Major coastal cities of the three countries could host trilateral or multilateral consultation of the triad involving other countries. Finding a common language and building a constructive dialogue between China, the United States, and Russia is extremely required. Thank you.
Thank you for all the panel members for today's discussion. And I want to do a brief review. So we came in asking whether cooperation or confrontation defines this century. I think the answer is whichever one we choose to practice tomorrow morning. It really, the ball is in our hands. And we have heard 7 different starting points. There's one common ground that's real, is that our economies are very much too intertwined, and our weapons nowadays are too lethal, and our shared problems too urgent for a zero-sum fantasy. Okay? So let's not wait for a grand summit some other time that may never come. Let's let our 3 think tanks propose something that's more concrete, like to do something with microeconomic stability and crisis prevention, and maybe some Arctic climate security things, just to name a few. Okay? And let capital staff them with technical experts, not political appointees. Okay? And dialogues, I think, is definitely not a weakness. It's the hard, boring, but necessary work of the powers that we have to do. And finally, I want to thank everybody, and I want to thank Dean Wang Wen and Jin Qian. Thanks to our panelists, and thank you for everybody who stayed up late or woke up early to join us. And the session is concluded. Thank you.